My name is Penelope, I'm 38 and I live in Michigan. On Thanksgiving, in the middle of a table full of relatives, my sister accidentally opened my laptop. And the whole family fell silent when they saw my account balance was more than $15 million. But instead of congratulating me, they all shouted that I had to hand it all over to her, because she's the one who deserves a life of luxury. In that moment, I realized I had never really been considered part of this family. It felt like decades of being forgotten, dismissed, and denied credit for my efforts suddenly compressed and exploded in an instant. I had worked without stopping from the abandoned childhood years to building a successful company with my own hands. Yet, in my parents' and sisters' eyes, it was simply something they were entitled to demand. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? When those closest to you can't see your efforts, only the money you've made. Leave a comment to share your experience, hit like if you relate, and don't forget to subscribe to follow the rest of this bitter and surprising story. Let me tell you the journey from a child abandoned in the dark to a woman who built an empire worth millions. And the price paid when that secret was exposed at a family dinner. I was born and raised in a small town near Grand Rapids, Michigan. My family wasn't wealthy, but we had enough. My father worked as a mechanical engineer at an auto parts plant, and my mother was an elementary school teacher. My early years were fairly peaceful. My mother often read to me before bed, and my father occasionally took me fishing at the lake near our house on weekends. I used to think I was loved in that home. Until I was 8 and Madison was born. She arrived more than 2 months early, weighing less than 2 kilograms, her skin wrinkled and bluish like a porcelain doll left out in the cold. I still remember that night vividly. My mother didn't come home and I was woken up near 2 a.m. by Aunt Amanda, my mother's sister. "Get up, Penelope. Pack a few clothes, your mom's in the hospital." I didn't understand what was happening. I was just scared. Aunt Amanda didn't explain much, only urged me to hurry, saying she would explain later. I slung my small backpack on, sat quietly in the back seat of her car, stared out through the fogged glass, waiting for something I couldn't name. From that day on, the house I knew was no longer mine. When Madison came home after more than a month in an incubator, the whole living space changed. My mother turned the living room into a sterilized zone, with air purifiers, hand sanitizer stations in every corner, and strict hospital-like rules. I was forbidden to come near my sister. The slightest sneeze or cough from me triggered an immediate gesture from my mother. "You need to stay at Grandma Margaret's for a few days. Madison mustn't catch anything." At the slightest sign of illness, I was sent away like an object that might cause harm. First, I found it enjoyable. Grandma Margaret, my father's mother, was the only relative who treated me like an actual child. She let me help set the breakfast table, play with her antique button collection, tell me stories about the war, and teach me how to spot fake gemstones. She always made me feel valuable. Gradually, though, I realized that every time I left the house it wasn't really to help care for my sister, as Grandma had said. I was a threat. In my parents' eyes, I was an uncontrollable source of germs. I learned to be quiet. At school I became studious. I poured everything into tests, science projects, and presentations. I scored perfect on the statewide math test. The teacher called home to share the news and my mother texted back, "Oh, really? Hey, thanks, Mrs. Teacher." The next day I found the certificate among an unopened pile of mail, nobody bothering to hang it on the fridge. A few weeks later, Madison made a crude drawing of a dog that her preschool teacher pinned to the classroom board. The whole family came to see it. My mother even cried. My daughter has artistic talent from a young age. I stood in the stairwell, watching the applause for a child who couldn't read the alphabet yet, while my research paper on spectral phenomena was shoved into a kitchen drawer. I grew used to people not asking, "How was your day?" I stopped expecting encouragement because I understood it wasn't meant for me. I learned to exist quietly. I discovered a strange passion, spending hours with Grandma Margaret, listening to her recount each piece of antique jewelry she'd collected. Every gem, every clasp, every tiny hallmark had its own story. She let me handle them, taught me how to distinguish real from fake, old from new, even when the piece was merely plated. Something stirred in me whenever I held an Edwardian hairpin or an Art Deco necklace. Grandma called it Penelope's eye. I remember her whisper as she placed a vintage emerald ring on my finger. "Don't let anyone make you feel invisible, do you understand?" I nodded, even though I didn't fully grasp what she meant then. Over the years, the distance between me and my family grew more obvious. Madison grew up bathed in praise. She merely said, "I want to learn piano," and my parents signed her up for an expensive instrument and a private teacher. When I asked to join an advanced art class, my mother brushed it off. "Those things just waste time. Focus on your studies." At school, I joined debate, the science club, and the newspaper staff. I didn't tell them at home. I learned to succeed without anyone watching. At a student honors ceremony, I walked across the stage alone, with no family faces in the audience. Meanwhile, my mother live-streamed Madison's ballet recital, only 6 minutes long, and emailed that Madison even missed her spot twice. I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt emptiness. One winter afternoon, I walked home from school in the biting wind. The house was locked tight. No one waited inside. Madison had a mild cold, so I was quarantined. I walked over to Grandma Margaret's. She made me a cup of hot chocolate, wrapped me in a heavy blanket, and spoke as if she had seen it before. "You will go far from here and you will live a life they never imagined." I smiled then, thinking she was comforting an abandoned child. I had no idea that was the first stroke on a large canvas I would one day paint myself. I learned to live quietly in my own home, as if I always needed permission to exist. Applause, proud looks, family nights around a shared achievement, all of it seemed reserved for Madison. At 15, my project on generating energy from biofilms was selected to represent Michigan at the National Science Fair. My science teacher, Mr. Brent, pulled me aside after class, pride shining in his eyes. "Penelope, do you realize only 3 students from the whole state were chosen this year?" I only smiled and nodded, feeling my chest tighten. I thought of telling my mother. I thought of the fridge covered in Madison's drawings. I thought of last year's State Debate Award certificate, still in a desk drawer unread. That night, I placed the invitation to the fair on the dinner table just as my father set down the TV remote. "Dad, I was selected for the National Science Fair in Ohio next month. The school is organizing the trip. It would be great if a family member could come along." He didn't look up. "Next month is Madison's birthday. She wants to celebrate at the bowling alley. I think the whole family will be busy." I stayed silent, folded the letter, and put it in my bag. No one asked again. No one mentioned it. The following week, I quietly boarded the school bus with a few classmates and 2 teachers heading to Columbus. I packed the lunch I'd made, wearing the coat Grandma had given me last year. When I stepped onto the stage, answering the judges' questions and explaining how biofilms could convert waste into electricity, I saw parents of other contestants recording on their phones, waving and cheering. I had no one in the audience. Still, I stood tall and spoke clearly, as if one person were watching: Grandma Margaret. I won the gold medal. The awards ceremony was held in the main arena at Ohio State University. The medal felt heavy and cold around my neck, but I felt only a hollow chill at the back of me. On the ride home, I opened my phone to a message from my mother. "Madison has a slight fever, she isn't eating much. Take care of yourself." I didn't reply. In 12th grade, SAT results were released. I remember opening the envelope from the College Board with trembling hands. I earned a perfect 1600. An almost unimaginable achievement. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I sat there, stunned. That night, I placed the envelope on the dinner table beside the electricity bill my father was reading. "I scored a perfect SAT," I said. My mother was pouring milk for Madison and didn't look up. "Oh, really? Good. Remember to clean your room before bed." Madison glared at me. "Why do you always say things just to get attention?" My mother immediately turned to comfort her. "Sweetheart, don't take it to heart. Your sister just likes to plan things." I didn't respond. I took the envelope back, folded it, and placed it in the drawer next to my bed. A week later, Madison brought home a C+ in American literature. My mother printed it and pinned it to the refrigerator with a heart-shaped magnet, scribbling in red pen, "We're proud of our daughter." I stopped opening the fridge every morning from that day on. In the spring, acceptance letters began to arrive. Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, Michigan. I carefully placed each envelope into a box, locked it, and hid it under the bed. I told no one, sought no opinion, waited for no congratulations. I did everything on my own: essays, recommendation requests, and the financial aid applications. My counselor, Mr. Mitchell, was the only one who stayed after class to check every FAFSA document with me. He said, "Penelope, You're one of the few students I've met who can stand on her own without asking for anything. I smiled. I had learned that way of life long ago. The day I received a full scholarship to the University of Michigan, tuition, housing, and books covered, I cooked a small celebration for myself. Spaghetti made in a small pot, a slice of toast, and a glass of strawberry milk. My parents weren't home. They were at the high school attending Madison's play. She had the supporting role in The Sound of Music. My mother had prepared a new dress. My father rented a professional video camera. I still kept the play schedule tacked above my desk. It was the same date as my scholarship notice. I ate, washed the dishes, and walked around the neighborhood. When I returned, the light in Madison's room was on. Laughter floated from the living room. No one asked how my day had been. I wasn't sad anymore. But I no longer had hope. I understood more clearly than ever. Some children grow up not to be loved but to learn to live without it. And sometimes that very lack makes them unbreakable. I could not have imagined that the shadow I lived under during childhood would one day be the thing the whole family could not bear when I stepped into the light. I left Michigan one August morning when the sky was still gray and a light mist clung to the bus window. My worn backpack held everything I owned: a few changes of clothes, a notebook, and the silver ring Grandma Margaret had quietly tucked into my hand the night before. "Keep it, not for its value but for the memory," she said, her eyes fixed on a small framed photo of me from elementary school, back when I still smiled bright beside her. The University of Chicago was no walk in the park. The pace was fast, my schedule was packed, and everything around me made me feel like an outsider. I had no close friends, no parties, no clubs. Days were for classes, nights were for work. At first I waited tables at a cafe near campus, then moved to a night shift at the library. But the job that changed my life came from a note tacked to the bulletin board in the art history department. Part-time position, basic knowledge of jewelry required, work at Gold Green, upscale pawn shop. I called right away. Gold Green sat on a quaint street in the north part of the city. From the outside it looked no different from a high-end jeweler: gleaming glass windows, a bronze-engraved sign, and a string of silent cameras watching every movement. The man who interviewed me was Mr. Green, an elderly gentleman with a deep voice and penetrating eyes. "What do you know about antique watches?" I was honest. "Not much. But I can read the dial, the wear on the winding crown, and the ticking that never lies." He raised an eyebrow. "Where did you learn that?" "My grandmother. She collected antique jewelry. She has a Hamilton wristwatch from the 1940s. She taught me how to clean it without scratching the crystal." He said nothing more, simply nodded and handed me a piece of silk. "Start tomorrow." From then on, I was at Gold Green every afternoon after class. I learned with my eyes, my hands, my memory, and my instincts. A sapphire ring that looked like a flea market find? Not at all, it was genuine, but the stone's setting had been replaced after the war. A necklace that looked dull? Could be a Louis Rousselet, if you could recognize the characteristic clasp. I began to record everything in a small leather notebook. Signs distinguishing genuine Tiffany company from counterfeits, how to spot heat-treated stones, the historical development of wristwatch construction by era. Every item that passed through my hands told a story. A widower brought in a white gold bracelet, the inside engraved, "Always with you no matter what." He trembled as he placed it on the glass. I didn't ask questions. I wrapped it gently and paid him the full price. A young woman brought an engagement ring, the diamond glittering but cold. She looked at me and gave a thin smile. "I need cash. No advice, please." I gave none. I examined the wear, brought out the loop, then said as usual, "It's real. VS1 clarity. Worth keeping, but it's your call." Gradually Mr. Green entrusted me with more tasks. Preliminary assessments. Filing. Contacting auction houses for rare pieces. I was no longer just the cashier. Once he handed me a small brooch shaped like a swallow, studded with a dazzling blue stone. "Anything special about this?" he asked. I lifted it, felt the weight, evaluated the metal, then turned it over. The safety catch is a French-style roll, common in Art Nouveau pieces. The stone is real aquamarine, but the seat is a little loose, likely remounted. I'd say early 20th century French. Possibly Lalique. He looked at me as if seeing me with fresh eyes. "Exactly. You have a very good eye." No one in my family had ever said that to me. So I immersed myself in the quiet world of tiny objects that held vast secrets. A ring could tell you about a marriage gone wrong. A pocket watch could trace steps of history. Every item, whether worn or opulent, had a reason to exist. I began to feel I belonged there, not under glaring lights or applause, but where attention to detail, patience, and passion were honored. One Friday evening, as I was closing the ledger, Mr. Green rose, pulled a small box from a drawer, and opened it in front of me. "What do you think of this?" Inside was a lily-shaped hairpin, opal arranged with exquisite artistry, set in rose gold. I inhaled. This is no ordinary piece. The engraving on the back suggests hand craftsmanship, maybe by the Castellani family. He gave a slight nod. "I was testing you. I've kept this for 30 years. No one has ever guessed it right." That night, as I stepped out of the shop, I lingered long before the window glass that reflected my silhouette. A thin girl, hair tied back, wearing an old coat, but with eyes bright because she was finally seen. For the first time I called myself someone of value, not because anyone else said so, but because I could say it to myself. I moved to New York just 3 days after graduation, carrying 2 small suitcases, a carefully wrapped portfolio, and my worn leather notebook, crowded with notes on gems, watches, and antique jewelry. The city was loud and cold, but I wasn't afraid. Compared with years of feeling invisible under my own roof, the skyscrapers casting shadows along Madison Avenue felt almost easier to breathe under. My new job was at Westminster Carrington, one of the most prestigious auction houses on the East Coast. I was hired in the jewelry backroom, the lowest position in the department. Most of my time was spent entering data, measuring, numbering, and organizing lots for cataloging. Each morning I walked past the grand hall where senior specialists traded terms like cartouche, pave setting, and tarnish treatment. I wasn't allowed to sit with them. I didn't complain. I arrived early and left late. I used every lunch break to study auction records in the internal library. I memorized how experts distinguish Colombian emeralds from Zambian ones by fluorescence. I learned to analyze Edwardian setting techniques just by how stones were set near prongs. The more I handled these objects, the more I understood that the world of diamonds and gems was not mere glitter. It was history, culture, love, betrayal, and secrets buried in every tiny engraving. One late weekday afternoon, I was restacking trays in preparation for the weekend's inspection when a dark wooden box at the bottom of a cabinet made me pause. It hadn't been labeled with a lot number as usual. I opened it. Inside lay an Art Deco necklace. A string of pearls interspersed with baguette-cut sapphires, set in sections of white gold. At first glance it didn't stand out. Many reproductions of this style had been made in Asia in the 1980s. Some staff had even labeled the box "fake, no action needed." I couldn't look away. Something didn't add up. I took a loupe and examined the clasp closely. The hallmark was faint, almost invisible, an L enclosed in a lozenge. My heart quickened. I had seen that mark only once before, in an old record at Gold Green, linked to Lavier et Fils, a French jewelry house that went bankrupt in the 1930s, leaving only a few pieces preserved in museums. I brought the piece to the senior appraiser's office. He flipped through it and waved it off. "Fake. A cheap copy." I politely asked for extra time to investigate. After hours, I secretly took the necklace home, a risky move but necessary. I spent the weekend cross-referencing features. The clasp type, the piercing technique, the natural sapphire's refraction under cool white light. I called an old contact, Professor Louis Frommer, who once taught antique jewelry courses in Chicago. "I think I'm holding a Lavier piece, Professor," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Do you have photos?" I sent them. An hour later he called back, unable to hide his excitement. "If it's real, you're holding one of 3 surviving necklaces from the Lumiere Bluey collection. The starting estimate should be no less than $300,000. I did not sleep that night. On Monday morning, I presented my findings to my superiors with analysis, cross-references, and academic sources. At first they were skeptical, but when the Gemological Institute of America confirmed the stone's nature and the metal's age, the room erupted. The necklace was consigned to the autumn sale. A European collector won it for $412,000. My name appeared in the lot notes. Authentication confirmed by Penelope R. Backroom. 3 days later, I received a call from the HR director. We'd like to move you to the senior appraisal team. Assistant to the chief appraiser. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then simply replied, yes. Thank you for your trust. From then on, I participated in private appraisal sessions, closed meetings for VIP clients, unpublicized lots, anonymous estate pieces requiring valuation for inheritance. An English widow brought in a small pair of earrings and said, "They're not worth much, just my great-aunt's wedding pieces." I examined them and was quiet for a long time. "Ma'am, this is Cartier 1926. Designed for the wife of the Earl of Sheffield. It bears an authentic hallmark hidden on the reverse of the motif. Market value now is approximately $180,000 to $220,000, depending on sale." He wept, holding my hand, trembling. "For decades I thought they were costume jewelry. Thank you for seeing what nobody else did." I smiled and said softly, "I understand that feeling." Step by step I moved up. No introductions, no hand pushed from behind. I walked on my own, built upon years of being dismissed and overlooked. And in that quiet ascent, I carved out a place where people no longer called me Madison's sister, but Penelope, the one who can see true value in things others overlook. I left New York on a foggy morning while the city still slept under distant car horns and blurred streetlights. No farewell party, no goodbyes. I left quietly as I had lived and worked all those years. Detroit met me with bone-deep cold and endless rows of gray brick houses. It wasn't a place most would pick to start an upscale jewelry authentication firm. But I didn't want glamour. I wanted silence to rebuild. My first office was an attic above an old laundromat on a quiet street. Less than 30 square meters. The wooden floor creaked underfoot. Paint peeled from the walls, outlets were loose, the curtains smelled faintly of mildew. I cleaned every corner, painted the walls a pale beige I mixed myself, and furnished the space with second-hand tables and chairs. The chestnut leather chair had a slight tear on the arm, but when I sat in it I felt it was mine. I printed "Penelope Rare Finds" on a small decal and stuck it on the glass door. Discreet, unassuming. No one walked in on day one. No calls came in the first week. I sat alone, riffling through old files I'd brought from New York, wondering if I'd made a foolish gamble. I lived on a small savings cushion and a personal loan from a local bank I had to convince twice. Each month rent, utilities, and insurance shaved my account like small, steady cuts. I wrote introduction emails to every small auction house in the area, to antique dealers, to long-established jewelers. I sent hundreds of handwritten letters with business cards printed on recycled paper. On the third week, a man named Morris walked in. He was in his 60s, wearing a long dark blue coat, carrying a mahogany box. "You Penelope?" he asked. I stood and nodded. "Yes. Please have a seat." He opened the box. Inside was a platinum ring set with a deep purple tanzanite, a strange spiral design. I inherited this from my sister. She used to live in Paris. "Do you think it's worth anything?" I slipped on gloves, carefully lifted the ring and held it under the loupe. "This cut isn't common. This style appeared around the 1960s, but..." I paused when I noticed a small mark near the ring's base, the letters LD engraved faintly. I opened my notebook and turned to the exact page. "This is one of Louis Darden's rare designs. If it's genuine, its value is no less than $85,000. Morris sat there, stunned. I saw his hand tremble slightly. "My sister said it was just a keepsake." I replied softly, "Some keepsakes are more valuable than people think. I can verify it precisely if you agree to let me send it to the gem lab." 3 weeks later, the ring was authenticated. Morris returned and placed a cashier's check on the table. "You keep 10%. The rest I want to sell through you. I don't trust those brokers in New York." After that, he introduced me to his wife's close friend, a former Broadway actress who owned a collection of hairpins from the 1920s. Then a prominent lawyer brought in a client's jewelry set to determine its value for an inheritance case. I didn't advertise, I didn't place newspaper ads, and I didn't run Facebook promotions. I let the work speak for itself. I continued writing handwritten thank you notes for each client, wrapping every piece in tissue paper with a wax seal, and including a printed analysis on heavy paper edged in pale gold ink. Clients began to return. They referred me to friends, relatives, and business partners. Each week I saw just enough people to maintain quality. I refused any piece I couldn't spend the proper time researching carefully. In the second year, I rented a larger office with a reception room, a professional photography studio, and secure display cases. I also hired my first employee, Jenny, a recent graduate in gemology from Chicago, with eyes sharp as a razor and a fierce love for anything made before 1950. "I want to learn everything you know," she said during the interview. I only smiled. "Then be prepared to read thousands of pages and inspect the tiniest scratch under a loupe." We worked tirelessly. Some days we skipped lunch. Some nights we stayed in the office until the early morning just to reanalyze a UV fluorescence report on a stone suspected to be fake. After 5 years, my company had 3 offices in Detroit, Chicago, and Charlotte. Our clients included politicians, Hollywood actors, international collectors, and retirees who brought jewelry they'd long assumed was costume. I turned down every interview. I didn't want my reputation to run ahead of my work. I wanted respect to come from the quality of what we did. On my business card was only one short line. Penelope Reed, verifying true value. No flourish. No excess. And each time I looked back at my old leather notebook, its cover frayed at the edges, ink smudged where coffee had spilled, I smiled. Because I had started with empty hands. And in a world full of fakery, I chose to build an empire from truth. I still went home for major holidays, still sat in the old wooden chair at the familiar dining table, where quiet dinners, rushed breakfasts, and countless times I forced down a tough slice of roast meat while my mother murmured on about Madison's latest accomplishment had played out. I didn't talk about my work. I let them think I worked at a used goods shop. "She's persistent, isn't she?" my mother would say to Aunt Amanda while I washed dishes after Easter. "Her pay can't be high, but she lives simply, not flashy like kids today." Aunt Amanda nodded, glancing at me. "She looks thin. Poor thing." I wiped my hands on the old kitchen towel and smiled. I wasn't hungry, I wasn't tired. I was simply living differently than they expected. I still wore the old coat every time I came home. It was a Zara trench with a worn collar I'd bought back when I'd worked night shifts at the university library. Underneath, I wore a pale cashmere sweater custom-made by an Italian tailor, worth nearly $4,000. No one noticed. And I didn't want them to. The amount I sent home each month remained steady. $6,000, transferred to my father's account under the name Penelope R. Living allowance. I told them it was a research grant from a private Detroit fund, and that I didn't use it all. "You don't need to send that much," my mother once said over the phone, her tone modest, but I could picture the tilt of her head, half pity, half triumph. "You should take care of yourself. Are you eating too frugally?" I answered briefly, "I'm managing." In their minds, I still lived in a small rented apartment with an old gas stove, no central heat, and instant noodles every week. They assumed I was frugal because I had no other choice. I didn't correct them. When my company opened its 3rd office in Charlotte, I stood in the finance meeting and outlined plans to expand into the European market. The next day I sat in my mother's living room, quietly eating an egg salad laden with too much mayonnaise, listening to Madison go on and on about the lip care campaign her company had just launched. "You know," Madison tilted her head, smiling as if she'd invented a new marketing concept, "I came up with the name Glow Go. Customers love it." My mother clapped, visibly moved. "Our daughter is so talented. 27 and already doing marketing for a popular natural cosmetics brand in the area. Penelope, did you hear?" I nodded, smiled lightly. "Heard it. Nice. How about you?" my father asked, eyes never leaving the financial section of the morning paper. "Is your used goods shop doing okay?" I poured more tea for myself. "It's fine. Keeps me going." Madison giggled. "You must work at an antique place, right? Lots of cool stuff. Bring me by sometime, I might want a few pieces for a vintage-style bedroom." I stayed silent. I didn't want them to know about my 24/7 secure storage facilities, or the appraisal rooms with lighting adjusted precisely to reveal a ruby's natural fluorescence. I doubted they'd understand the feeling of placing your hand on a necklace that once belonged to a Danish princess, or signing an appraisal contract for a Dubai magnate. They didn't want to know. They only wanted me to play the role they'd assigned, the quiet, modest sister who never outshines the family's pride. One Thanksgiving, I offered to arrange catering because my mother had just undergone a lumbar nerve procedure. The doctor had instructed her not to stand for long periods, lift anything heavy, or become stressed. I called to ask if she needed help. She coughed softly and sighed. We'll keep things simple. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie. I was going to skip the almond-creamed green beans this year. My hands can't handle pots anymore. I was quiet for a moment, then softened my voice. Let me handle the meal. I know an events catering team. I'll have them bring everything, set it up beautifully, and clean up. Your hands won't have to lift a thing. Don't be silly, you can't afford that. Your shop must barely cover the bills. Don't push yourself. I already booked it, Mom. I've saved enough. I hung up and called Amelie Finch, the caterer who handled my company's Chicago office opening. I chose a full menu: French-style seafood hors d'oeuvres, herb-roasted turkey, pear salad with blue cheese, pecan pie glazed with rum syrup. The total came to nearly $8,000, not including wine and service fees. On Thanksgiving morning, I arrived early. The catering team was already there, setting up the buffet on china, arranging fresh flowers. The scent of cinnamon and rosemary filled the house, masking the stale smell of old paint and worn floorboards. Madison came down the stairs in fuzzy pink slip-on slippers. You actually hired someone to cook? She asked. Yeah. So Mom can rest. He sniffed. This doesn't smell like Thanksgiving. I prefer Mom's stuffed turkey. I went back into the kitchen without answering. I wasn't cooking, but I knew how to choose the right people to cook. That was enough. I had my laptop with me to check on an online auction for an Art Nouveau jewelry set a Dubai client had authorized. With no private space in the house, I went back to my old bedroom, still laid out like when I left, only dustier and used now as a Christmas storage room. I booted up and opened the tracking dashboard. The company account balance was visible on the screen: $15,200,000. Below were deals in progress: a $2,100,000 appraisal contract with a European auction house, a consulting engagement for a gallery in Qatar, and orders for private authentication reports for anonymous clients. I heard a door open before I could turn. Madison stood in the doorway with a glass of orange juice, her eyes sliding from the screen to my face. What are you doing? Work files. I'm watching an online auction. Is that a bank account? I closed the screen gently. None of your business. Madison didn't say anything. She set the glass on my old desk, then suddenly grabbed the laptop and walked out of the room. I ran after her but was too late. Madison, stop. She entered the living room full of people, turned up the screen, and faced them. Does anyone know what Penelope's been doing in her room? I thought she lived frugally, running a little used goods shop. But the room fell silent. Madison held the laptop up and turned the screen toward everyone. On it was the current balance. The line read, $15,287,341.92. Below were columns of contracts in progress. Mom put her fork down. Dad narrowed his eyes. A few relatives stopped chewing. I stepped in, slowly took the laptop back and set it on the buffet table. All eyes fixed on me. What is this? My mother asked, her voice trembling. What did you do to have that much money? I stood up straight and looked her in the eye. I'm the founder and CEO of Penelope Rare Finds, a company that authenticates high-end jewelry with 3 offices and a global clientele. I started it from zero, without borrowing from anyone, without family partners, without calling in favors. Madison sank into a chair, her face pale. No way. You're lying. You live like a poor person. I never said I was poor. I just didn't talk about it much because I understand nobody wants to hear. My father slammed his hand down on the table. How many years have you hidden this from your family? While your mother nearly had to sell the house so your sister could go to graduate school. While we had to scrimp every penny to pay medical bills. I looked at him. I have been sending $6,000 every month for the past 4 years. You can check the statements. That's responsibility. What about obligation? My mother jumped up. Why don't you split that money? Who do you think raised you? I gave a bitter smile. Every time I coughed, Mom sent me to Grandma's. Every award I won, Mom said Madison needed the attention more. When I got my scholarship, Mom didn't go with me because Madison had a performance. Is that how Mom raised me? The living room felt utterly quiet. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and quietly poured a glass of wine. Across the room, my mother began to cry. Madison bowed her head and bit her lip. I took a sip, then looked around at the relatives in the room, people who had assumed I would always be the shadow behind the beloved younger sister. And now they were panicked to discover that the shadow could stand upright, shine, and didn't need anyone to light the way. My mother still stood there, her face flushed, chest heaving with anger. Her gaze pinned me as though I had betrayed the whole family. I saw disappointment mingled with shock, but not a hint of self-questioning. "You make it sound so easy," she hissed through clenched teeth. "If it weren't for your father and me, would you even have gone to school? Who paid for food, housing, clothes? Now that you're rich, you look down on the people who raised you." I lifted my chin, my voice steady. "I have never forgotten you raised me. But when you call it raising, I remember being sent to grandma's every time I sneezed. I remember being told not to show off my awards because it would make Madison sad. When I got into college, the whole family went to watch Madison's play. Do you remember that?" She did not answer. The room was silent. I turned to my father. "And you? Did you even look at my perfect SAT score, or were you busy reading the paper as usual?" He clenched his jaw and turned away. I took a long breath and shook my head slightly. I'm not telling these things to demand anything. I'm saying them because the family standing here accuses me of living better than they expected, as if I've committed a crime for not being poor as they wished. Madison sat there sobbing. Not with remorse. I could read the look in her eyes, anger, resentment, envy boiling up. "You don't understand," Madison choked out. "You already have everything. I'm only asking for a little. I can't keep working for starvation wages. I want to do an MBA. I want to buy a decent apartment. $2 million is nothing to you." I tilted my head and looked at her, no longer angry, only tired. "You aren't asking me. You're demanding. There's a difference. I'm your sister. Yes. And all these years, you were raised with privileges I never had. You have everything I could only dream of. Now that I've built my life, you want to take a portion of it just because you believe you deserve it more." Madison fell silent. Tears continued to fall, but she offered no response. I turned back to my parents. "I used to think that if I tried hard enough, one day you would see me. But you didn't. In your eyes, I was only a shadow. No matter what I did or achieved, it never measured up to one mediocre presentation of Madison's at an evening class." My father stood up abruptly and slammed his fist onto the table. "Don't be insolent. After all, we are your parents. Without us, how would you be here today?" I looked him in the eye. "Without parents, I wouldn't be born. But because I was born into this family, I had to learn to stand on my own. I didn't wait for anyone to hand me opportunities. I took them. No one helped pay my tuition. No one drove me to interviews. No one handed me a connection to start. And now you say I owe you. We are family," my mother screamed. "Would you turn your back on your own blood? Family isn't people who demand loyalty while never giving recognition." I tried. But today I understand that if I stay, I'll be pulled back into the same old cycle, where my efforts get twisted and my successes are treated like crimes. I took out my phone and opened the banking app in front of them, canceling the automatic monthly transfer. Then I looked up. "From now on, I'm not sending money anymore. No one in this house can treat me with contempt while taking my money." My mother stared, her mouth open but words failing her. My father turned away. Madison screamed. "You can't do that. I need tuition money. I'm about to apply." I answered calmly, not raising my voice. "There are plenty of scholarships. Apply like I did. If you don't get them, work and save. I worked 2 jobs a day, lived on bread, and slept in a dorm bunk. If you want it, you can do it too." "You're cruel," Madison spat. "You're selfish." "No. I'm stopping letting others define my worth." I walked to the door and grabbed my coat. The room seemed frozen. Behind me, I heard my mother whisper to my father. "She's lost her mind. What can we do? We must protect whatever money she leaves for Madison." I turned back. "Don't worry. You won't have to concern yourselves with that anymore." I looked at my sister. "You don't need to go anywhere. Starting tomorrow, neither you nor Mom and Dad are allowed into any of my company's offices. Your names are on the do not admit list." Madison recoiled. "You're declaring war on the whole family." I shook my head slightly. No. This is how I keep peace for myself. I stepped out, closed the door with a gentle push. I felt no hatred. Only clarity, a cold, deep clarity down to the bone, as if shedding an old, heavy cloak of memories that no longer warmed me. I got into my car, started the engine, and watched the house lights through the blurred glass. That Thanksgiving, I left in my simple cashmere without a goodbye. But it was the first year I felt truly free. No longer a shadow. No longer living to satisfy people who never considered me enough. I had thought that after that evening everything would end in the necessary silence. A clear separation between me and those who once called themselves family. I was wrong. They wouldn't give up. They had never learned to respect boundaries. The following week Madison showed up at my Detroit office, dressed like she was heading to the mall. A bright red bodycon dress and a Michael Kors bag swinging from her arm. She went straight into the reception area as if visiting an old friend, smiling at my receptionist with a practiced politeness. I'm Penelope's sister. I left some personal documents in her office. I need to retrieve them right away. Jenny, who manages reception, called me from upstairs. I said one sentence. She has no appointment and no access. Please escort her out politely. 10 minutes later, security was escorting Madison from the building. That afternoon I received an email from an anonymous account. Who do you think you are? Someone who's forgotten her roots. Don't think money will break the family curse. We won't let you be. Attached was a screenshot of a public Facebook post from Madison's profile. In it she wrote that I, a cold, heartless sister who doesn't know how to love, refused to help when the family was struggling and was hiding millions while mom and dad scraped by. Under the post were comments from relatives I hadn't seen since high school. One wrote, I heard she's loaded but won't help anyone. Another bluntly, ungrateful daughter. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. A woman claiming to be a cousin from Minnesota I'd never spoken to left a message. Penelope, maybe you're misunderstanding. Family is everything. No matter what you do, don't turn your back on your blood. I didn't answer. 3 days later my parents showed up at the Charlotte office, unannounced. They wore formal clothes and stood in the lobby like churchgoers, telling my staff they were the CEO's parents, and needed to speak about family matters. Luckily I had already placed them on the company's do not admit list after the Madison incident. Jenny called me on video and panned the camera to them standing there, flustered, eyes darting as if looking for allies. Do you want me to call security? Jenny asked. I replied gently, no. Escort them out politely. Send them a notice from our lawyer. They left under compelled silence. That very afternoon my personal attorney Helen Bloom and I drafted an official letter to my parents and Madison, outlining harassment, invasion of privacy and defamation, and warning that if it continued we would pursue legal action. I didn't want a courtroom battle, but I wouldn't let anyone use family feelings as a moral cudgel to beat me down. Helen asked, do you want to stop here? I sipped my tea and replied firmly, I want this ended at the root. I began tracking the family's financial situation, largely through public records. With a few contacts in local real estate and a friend in banking, I learned the house my parents lived in had been mortgaged a second time to pay for Madison's MBA tuition and several extravagant expenses. I wasn't surprised. They'd told me they couldn't afford a new water filter, yet spent thousands of dollars upgrading the kitchen so their girl would have a place to film her cooking vlog. I set up an anonymous investment fund called Veritas Holdings and quietly participated in the foreclosure auction list when the bank began processing the overdue debt. Almost no one knew I was behind it. I let everything be handled through my lawyer and the fund's director. In less than 2 months, the house was sold to Veritas Holdings at a price well below market value. The day my family received the official notice that they had to leave because their grace period had ended, I was in Switzerland attending a European gem appraisal conference. Madison left a tearful voice message. She screamed, no longer keeping up a polite front. You can't do this. You're sick. That house is all the family's memories. It's where I grew up. It's where your room is. I didn't answer. But I listened to the message once more before deleting it. That night I had someone deliver a letter in a cream envelope, printed on Veritas Holdings stationery. It contained a gentle but clear notice. The new owner would lease the house back to the previous occupants if they met specific financial conditions within 1 week. They couldn't do it. A month later, I had the entire interior renovated. New paint, new hardwood floors, a modern lighting system. I removed everything that evoked the old family, even the framed photo of me standing next to Madison at age 12, once hanging lonely by the front door. The house now belonged to an appraisal company with a branch operating in the basement. I don't live there. I just needed it as a symbol. Not for revenge, but to prove this. When something has been discarded, it often never returns the same. I didn't do it out of hatred. I did it because I had learned a bitter lesson over nearly 4 decades. If you don't protect yourself, no one will do it for you. And if you don't cut things off at the root, they will keep intruding. Family had been both a root and a shackle. I didn't sever it for vengeance. I simply bound it so it could no longer strangle me. Under a clear autumn sky in New York, I stood in the main hall of the International Jewelry Exhibition, looking up at the stage where my company logo glittered under the spotlights. I had dreamed of this moment when I was a 12-year-old girl curled up by the attic window, quietly sketching first designs with a blunt pencil on school notebook paper. That dream had survived years of being dismissed, sidelined, and labeled a burden within my own family. Behind me were long glass cases displaying the newest collection, Margaret's Grace, named for my grandmother. She was the only woman who had held my hand through the storm, teaching me that true value resides not in glitter but in perseverance and compassion. The collection comprised 45 exquisite antique pieces, necklaces, earrings, brooches, rings, sourced from many cultures and restored by the finest artisans I'd selected over 3 years. Amid the thunderous applause of distinguished guests, I stepped up to the podium. The lights hit my face, but there was no glare. I had endured colder stares than these. My parents' look when I missed a transfer, or Madison's disdainful glance when I refused to fulfill the duty of being a sister. I spoke, slow and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, this collection is not only the culmination of art and tradition. It is also a message from a small woman who was undervalued and forgotten, yet rose from her own wounds. I paused and looked down at the front row, representatives from major brands, the press, and fellow appraisers. I could feel curious eyes on me. I smiled, then continued softly. Interestingly, a part of this collection was once thrown into the trash. A murmur ran through the hall. Yes, I nodded. For years ago, when a relative of mine moved out of the penthouse that used to be in my name, she left behind a box of fake antiques, believing them worthless. I gestured to the screen behind me, which displayed a photograph of an old cardboard box, the very box Madison had tossed when she was asked to clear out of the house. Mixed with tissue and packing paper and a few cheap items were a cracked turquoise brooch, 2 necklaces bearing ancient seals, and a lacquered wooden box with Southeast Asian motifs. With the help of a restoration specialist and a researcher from the Smithsonian, I said, we discovered that some pieces belonged to the collection of a Hungarian countess who immigrated to America in the early 20th century. Others originated from Kyoto in the 18th century. The room shifted from surprise to stunned silence. The estimated total value, I paused, is over $27 million. An audible, "Oh my God," came from the fashion journalist to the left. A single clap sounded, then the hall erupted into thunderous applause and whistles of admiration. I smiled quietly. Not because of the money, but for the irony. The final gift of being dismissed had become proof of my true worth. After the exhibition, as people began to file out, I returned to the private backstage room. My PR manager handed me a small box. Inside was my grandmother's old leather notebook, her shaky handwriting across the page. Penelope, if you read these lines, then you have gone far beyond where you began. Live like a river, you don't need to roar, simply flow in the right direction. Those who value you will step down to the riverbank with you. I couldn't hold back tears. I had lived like a river, quietly crossing rapids, quietly clearing a path, quietly bringing water to parched places. I had forgiven without kneeling and responded without hatred. I don't know where Madison is now. The jewelry company she tried to start after leaving me went bankrupt in 6 months for selling counterfeit items and cheap PR stunts. The people who once praised her online now mock her, circulating memes of her photos. I don't feel vindictive or pitying. Peace. As for my parents, after the bank seized their house, They moved into a small rented place in the suburbs, without fanfare or weekend gatherings full of relatives. They once sent me a handwritten letter. Not an apology, just accusations calling me ungrateful, cruel, and disrespectful. I folded it up and placed it in my filing cabinet like any other archived document. My life now has no shouting, no midnight calls asking for money, no family dinners where I am treated like a walking ATM. I have quiet mornings with chamomile tea, late afternoons watching the sunset from the 32nd floor office balcony, and leisurely strolls with real friends who call me by my name, not my bank balance. I also have something else: the Margaret Scholarship for young women from underrepresented communities who aspire to study design but lack the means. Each year I select 3 recipients, funding not only tuition but also mentoring them through their development. It's my promise to Grandma, to help little dreamers not be crushed by life the way she feared I would be. One Friday, as I was getting ready to leave the office, my assistant stepped in and said quietly, "There's a woman here, says she's an old friend and wants to meet you for a few minutes." I tilted my head. "What's her name?" "Madison." I looked out at the glass facade as the sun stretched orange across rooftops. I didn't say anything, just smiled. "Tell her I'm not here anymore. The old Penelope has moved on." I walked out of the office carrying my small leather bag and my grandmother's notebook. In my heart there was no hatred left. Only one thing remained: freedom. What do you think of my choice? Was I too harsh to let my parents and sister taste the consequences of their greed and betrayal? Or was it the only way to protect the values my grandmother Margaret taught me: integrity, resilience, and the courage to stand up even when abandoned? I don't regret it. In the end, I chose to live true to myself, to love with boundaries, and to answer darkness with light. The light of intellect, achievement, and gratitude toward the one who loved me unconditionally. And you, if you were in that situation, dismissed, betrayed, treated as a financial obligation rather than a person, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear your stories, perspectives, and experiences. Perhaps we have more in common than we think. If you want to hear more stories like this, about family, justice, and reclaiming self-worth, every week, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more journeys behind the doors of homes that seem peaceful, and I believe you'll find parts of your own reflection in them.